All right. Do you see a really handsome man wearing a kilt on one side?
Yeah, we see a
All right.
handsome man on the right-hand side.
Okay, we're looking at the same screen then. Well, welcome to the Kilt Honor, everyone. And my name is Jessica. I hope you enjoyed today's honor. Feel free to ask questions in the chat box if you have any. And here we go. All right, so the kilt is known all around the world as Scotland's national dress. Anytime you see a kilt or bagpipes, everyone automatically thinks of Scotland. And for the Scottish people, it is a sign of patriotism. It's a part of their identity, culture, and also history. So what about if you're not a Scot? What if you are in Scotland, but you're not of Scottish descent? Or what if you are not in Scotland? It doesn't matter. The point is anyone all around the world can wear a kilt, and there are different types of kilts for everyone. So you can always find a kilt, and a lot of people wear kilts. Maybe even if it's not their culture, they still wear kilts because they enjoy the textile variety, the patterns, the feel of wearing a kilt is unique to most clothing, especially for men. And so, yeah, you can see here a few pictures of different people around the world who wear kilts. And none of the people in these pictures are Scottish descent. Okay, so etymology is the history or the study of the origin of words, why they have their meaning, how they came to be. And if you look at the word kilt, it's kilt means clothes that are tucked in around the body. And the Scots word, now remember, Scottish is not a different form of English. It's an actual language. Some consider it a dialect, but it's its own language, Scots. And so kilt means clothes that are tucked around the body. And that word actually comes from the Scandinavian Viking word, the ancient Norse word for kjalta, which means pleated. So they're very similar and in sound, and pretty much that was how the Scottish kilt clothing was described by the Scandinavian people when they came into Scotland. And that is a fake picture, obviously, that I have up there. I just thought it was interesting. Okay, so the definition of a kilt: clothing pleated and tucked around the body. So what's the main difference between what some people might say, oh, that's just a skirt, or that's a kilt? So a kilt has two front flaps, and then pleated, is it pleated in the back? Okay, that's the typical kilt. Uh-oh. All right, definition of a kilt. The modern kilt, I'm gonna have to move there you go. The modern kilt, a small or a walking, is a skirt type garment with pleats at the rear. Originally, it was used as a traditional dress of men and boys in the Scottish Highlands in the 16th century, and much further than that, much earlier than that, but we'll get into that later. Okay. Our next definition, things you'll need to know. These are terms that I'll be saying, so I just wanted to make sure that you knew ahead of time what they were. The next thing is a tartan. So what is a tartan? A tartan, or in Gaelic, it's called a brachan. And that's a pattern cloth consisting of crisscrossed horizontal and vertical bands in multiple colors. Tartans originated in woven wool, but now they are made in many other materials. Tartans are particularly associated with Scotland, but you will see different tartans from all around the world. And each tartan traditionally is associated with a meaning. The most common is a family clan. All right, so yes, I put Scottish family clans in there because this is the main history of the kilt, but as you'll see through the presentation, that they're widely used in many countries today, but especially in Ireland, Wales, England, and Scotland. Definition of plaid or plaid, and we'll talk about that. So some people pronounce this as plaid, some people say plaid. Plaid comes from the Scottish Gaelic word plaid, which actually means a blanket, or a large rectangular fabric or garment. And it was a heavy woolen cloth that was sometimes used on beds, sometimes worn over the body like a large cloak or a shawl, folded and used as a shawl, or some sort of partial body covering. But plaid does not mean a checkered pattern. It actually means blanket. Now, in North America, a whole other topic, how it got to North America and why it was called plaid over there. But that's a common mistake. In North America, we say plaid for anything that looks similar to what I'm wearing, which is in fact a tartan. So the style of a plaid tartan clothing was popularized in America later because of Scottish and Irish immigrants. And then it became transitioned into shirts and different clothing. It was traded as the blankets. The tartan blankets were used as bartering tools with Native Americans and etc. So if you ever see flannel or plaid shirts in stores now all over the world, a lot of the modern fashion has different plaid or tartan textile patterns, and those all originate from the same group. Okay, and the last definition is set. So a set is the original section, the color pattern that's repeated over and over in the different tartan, okay? And the set is what distinguishes it from every other tartan. Okay, so let's talk about the history and the evolution of the kilt. Are we good so far, Dayan? No questions?
I'm just checking the Facebook. No, we're doing good at the moment. Thank you, Jessica, for this. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so we're talking about the history and evolution of the kilt, but however, the kilt is made out of most kilts are made out of a special fabric called a tartan, right? And we established that. So one of the interesting things about it is we don't have very, very early written evidence of specifically the modern kilt as we know it today. It's the written evidence is somewhat new, but we do have very old evidence of the tartan garments themselves. So we have the most recent is the Urumqi mummies, and these were found in China, in Western China. And what they found were a lot of these definitely Caucasian looking mummies, and they had large, colorful wardrobes wrapped with them. And so the hypothesis of the archaeologist, the textile archaeologist, her name was Barber, and her hypothesis was that it had something to do with the Silk Road, how they arrived there. But all of the individuals were between 5 and 6 feet tall. They were fair-haired, predominantly blonde, full heads of hair. The men had very thick beards. And in other words, the point is they were very different from the Mongolian people that are you have been found in that area today and in the past. So the thing about these people, though, is not actually that they were Caucasian, it's what they were buried with. So if you look at the pattern on the left, that is an example of what one of the fabrics tartans looked like. And what they had their regular clothing or longer clothing, and then they had wrapped themselves in these garments. And it's very similar to how, I don't know if you can see the thread there at the direction, but the thread is going diagonally. So the twill is diagonally, and then the pattern it is wafted in the other way, horizontally and vertically. So this was a very common pattern that was found on the left. And then you also found, you can also find in the Bronze Age salt mines that are in Hallstatt, which is in the Alps that are above Salzburg, Austria. You'll also find different tartan patterns that were there, and they date those from 5th to 8th century BC. Of course, these dates might not be exactly the same for us, or depending on what people think. But this is an example of what the patterns looked like, and they're found in different places of the world, buried with people that have the same genetic pool as the current natives in Ireland and Scotland. So something to think about. So let me keep going from here. This is one written reference that we have of the tartan from 100 BC from a Greek historian, Diodorus. It says, the way they dress is astonishing. They wear brightly colored and embroidered shirts with trousers called breke and cloaks fastened at the shoulder with a brooch. This is a brooch that I'm wearing, in case you're unfamiliar with the term. Heavy in winter and light in summer. So they had two different materials that were used, a lighter and a heavier, just like we've seen throughout history here in the UK. These cloaks are striped or checkered in design with the separate checks close together and in various colors. So I brought this up because many people, until recently, until these last few archaeologist discoveries were made, most people thought that the kilt was a fairly modern invention. And so these are just things that show that the tartan fabric and the kilts have actually been around for a very, very long time. Okay, so we have two main types of kilts that we're going to cover today. And we'll start with the Great Kilt. Sometimes towards the end of the 16th century is when we have the first clear description of this kilt, and it's called the Fela Mor, and it means Fela Mor. It means great wrap. And as you can see here, it is quite a large piece of fabric and it has a belt underneath. It's been folded to adjust to the size of the person. And I'll show you a little bit more about that. Now the other, there are three terms for this garment, this style of kilt, okay? Fela Mor, which means great wrap, Brecken and Fela, which is a tartan wrap, and then belted kilt or belted plaid, okay? But they all refer to the same garment if you see those terms. And with those, we have one of our Scottish Seventh-day Adventist models here. This is Duncan, and he's wearing the blue wool Scots bonnet. Now, in the past, we also have found kilts that were just of solid colors. For example, the color of dyed heather. So it could be like pinks or purples, browns, greens, all earthy tones, things that could be dyed from nature. And the clans back then, if they didn't, the other theory is that besides having their own tartans, they also were identified by large brooches, such as the one I'm wearing, or feathers, or flowers, and also by their bonnets. Interestingly enough, the mummies that were found in Urumqi that I mentioned earlier, one of the men was buried with over 60 of these hats. Isn't that interesting? So definitely the same people group. The shirts were originally made of hemp or wool or linen. Linen was for the rich, hemp and wool was for the poor, but most of the shirts that you'll see today that you wear with kilts are just made from cotton. And then they had special shoes called gillies, and you can see those down below. Before that, they were made, they weren't so fancy looking. They were made out of buckhide shoes, and so tanned leather, and then sewn together with string. These were, the reason the tops, someone said to me once, oh, they look like girls' ballet shoes. But if you look up the history of the gillies, you'll see they're the opposite of feminine. They're definitely not girly. And everything about the kilt and the clothing that goes with it was designed to help with the Scottish weather and the terrain. So the water can easily escape from those top holes of the shoes. Okay, so here are some BRAW YouTube videos for you to check out. There's Fandabi Dozy. He has some really cool videos where he wanted to know what it would have been like to live here in Scotland in the past, what his his ancestors went through. So he has some videos on that. There's Andy the Highlander, and he has a good video on how to put on the great kilt. And then there's another video of the last hand done tartan mill in the world. It's the only one that is completely done by hand. Even the spindles and spools and things that are used are hundreds of years old. Okay, so why the kilt? Why are there men that appear that they're in women's skirts, as I've heard? So why the kilts? They are definitely far from being girly, and they have a purpose. So one of them was ideal for harsh weather. If you've ever felt the kilt, there are different weights of the tartan fabric, and it was very protective. The wool was very protective against the elements. It was also protective from the treacherous terrain. This was a typical Highlanders wear, Highlanders attire. And if you've ever been scavenging around in the Highlands, just traipsing about, you'll see that there are plenty of things for you to get scratches on, for you to get cold, and then you're hot, and then you're cold, and then you're hot. And it gave good protection. It was thick. You could change the style that you wore it from. It gave you plenty of freedom of movement. So if you were jumping, or if you were climbing, or if you were laying down, you could adjust your clothing to fit your needs at that moment. And the other thing was, you could fold it in certain ways to have pockets where you could hide weapons, where you could hold your food, lot of different things. Back then, people used to carry around their most prized possessions. So for example, maybe it was a document or something. So the clothing, you could have plenty of hidden pockets in case someone overcame you. And also, it was a great blanket. Like it's like carrying around your sleeping bag with you at all times. And the last thing was, you could recognize who is who. It was a way to see family clans. It was a way to recognize allies and enemies. And I have one picture of a girl wearing just a tartan. I just wanted to show you what it would look like on a female as well. But as you can see on the bottom left, the back was generally longer so that it could come up around the shoulders. And then also, you know, in Scotland, it's raining, and then it's very sunny and hot, and then it's cold and windy, and then it's, you know, the weather's constantly changing. So they were able to pull it over their shoulders if needed, over their head if needed. And you can see on the bottom right, there's someone using it. It looks like they have it stuffed full, like a backpack would be, behind them. So different ways of wearing it. Okay, the first written reference of the belted kilt. So once again, there are written references of other styles of wearing the tartan, but of a belted kilt is in 1578 by a Roman. It says their clothing was made for use, being chiefly suited for war and not for ornament. All, both nobles and common people, wore mantles of one sort, except that the nobles preferred those of several colors. So they're saying that the poorer people had kilts, and that they could make into shawls or mantles, cloaks, but they were usually of plain colors. And then the very colorful ones were on the nobles. These were long and flowing, but capable of being neatly gathered up at pleasure into folds. This is just one example. There are many other written references. Here's one from George Buchanan in the History of Scotland. Their ancestors wore plaids of many color, and numbers still retain this custom, but the majority now in their dress prefer a dark brown, imitating nearly the leaves of the heather, that when lying upon the heath in the day, they may not be discovered by the appearance of their clothes. So they're talking more about both of these documentaries. I mean, both of these quotes are from people describing them in warring times, so to speak. Okay, the walking kilt. Oh, I forgot to change the picture for these. I'll do that later. The walking kilt, small or walking kilt, the knee-length tartan kilt that we're so familiar with today. It closely resembles the Habakuk, but there are a few differences. So what it essentially is the bottom half of the kilt without the parts that you can drape over your shoulders or hood. And this didn't really become popular until the late 17th or 18th century. And it was popular first in the lowlands and then became popular in the highlands. It was kind of like what I would call a workman's kilt. So there is a story of a Quaker ironmaster from Lancashire, and his name was Thomas Rawlinson. And he had a lot of Scottish Highlanders that would work at his furnaces near Inverness. And initially, you know, they all wore their great kilts. But because this was a factory, because they were smelting iron and manufacturing charcoal, he just didn't see it as a functional work attire. And he described it as cumbrous and unwieldy. So he designed the kilt on he modified the kilt on grounds of efficiency and practicality. And so what happened was he kind of drew up a sketch and said, hey, why don't we cut this part off and just sew this part together, and you can still wear your kilts, but less work hazard, so to speak. So some people say, oh, so the kilt was invented by an Englishman. The answer is no. It was just a modification. If you didn't get that from all the previous quotes and different pictures I was showing you, the Highland dress has continually been changed throughout history. The tartan attire has gone through a lot of changes, and this was just one other change. But it is the most closely resembling the modern kilt that we use today. One of the things to mention about the kilt is that it wasn't always an accepted attire. The Dress Act of 1746. So this was right after the Jacobite uprising, and the British Army really wanted to get government control over the Scots who were rebelling against England. And so they came up with the Dress Act of 1746, and it's pretty much prohibited them from using tartan, plaid, or any Highland garb, and speaking Gaelic. That is one of the reasons why Gaelic is not used as frequently in Scotland as it was in the past, because of different laws like this. And so they had to sign this oath. I have an example oath of one that you can find in one of the museums here. And anyway, so yeah, they had to sign this oath. And if they were caught with their Highland clothing on, AKA the Great Kilt, if they were caught with it, then the first sentence, they would have 6 months imprisonment. The second sentence, they would be sent to the plantations in different places for 7 years. And then the third sentence meant imprisonment or beheaded. Now, some people went straight to the third sentence. Some people ended up going to the second. Some remained in the first. But those were the rules that applied. And then during the ban, it became, let me go back. During the ban, it did become popular for a lot of the Scottish romantics, saying, no, we have to keep the Scottish culture alive. We have to rebel, so to speak. And so they continued to wear it. So you have a lot of different portraits and paintings during that time showing some of the leading figures trying to wear kilts, but in a disguised style. Okay, here is an excerpt. I'm not going to read this. This is just the official excerpt that was written, but you can read it yourself if you'd like another time. So this is why in Scotland, this is how it came from wearing, typically everyone was wearing kilts to trousers. It's just another modification of how clothes and fashion changes over time, but this had to do with the laws and then they became accustomed to wearing trousers, and also the industrial era, as they started working around heavier machinery and different factories, trousers became more popular. Then what happened was there were several people, such as Sir Walter Scott, and they said, you know what, we're Scottish, we don't want to lose the kilt, regardless of factories and regardless of the laws that existed in the past. We want to bring the Scottish tartan back. And so he really romanticized it in his poetry, in his writings, and any social occasion that he had, he would take advantage and wear his kilt. And it just so happened that in 1822, King George IV was going to visit Edinburgh for the first time. And so Sir Walter Scott and Stewart of Garth, they said, hey, we're organizing this event. Let's tell everyone to wear full Highland attire. And so they went ahead and they let King George IV know, and he jumped on board. Everyone became excited, and all of a sudden, they realized, wait a second, we don't even have enough people making kilts these days and tartans to supply the need for this one event. So they actually even ended up creating new factories, tartan factories and kilt factories for this event. And then of course, after that, they kept them going. But yeah, so it brought the kilts back. And this is one of the paintings of how King George IV arrived to the party. So he got really on board. Okay, so how are kilts made? Historically, Scottish clothing first came in solid colored plain wool at times. And then you see other historical accounts that say, no, like the ones we read earlier, that say that it's been around since the 3rd and 4th century. Here are a few facts. So how much cloth is needed for a great kilt? 7 to 9 yards. And there are even accounts that and pieces that have been found from the from the Alps and also from China, and those were closer to 12 yards of fabric. Can you imagine being wrapped in 12 yards of fabric, or even 7 to 9 yards? The modern kilts are not quite so long. They're 5 to 8 yards. That's pretty much regardless of what size of person you are. So even if you're very small, you're still going to get 5 to 8 yards. The average time to hand sew a kilt is 40 hours. The average time to stitch it together is 20 hours. And the average time to use a loom and hand weave the tartan, I say hand weave, this still involves the machines, not so the machine like you see on the right here, but someone diligently watching it, pulling out threads that have gone awry and things like that. That's 15 to 20 hours. And all of this hard work gives us the reason why kilts are so expensive. And they even have special kilt making academies. There's one in Edinburgh, for example. So one of the things that make a kilt so popular are the patterns, is the tartan pattern, the set that we described earlier. And they have different reasons, all of the different tartans have a meaning behind them. So you might see some tartans that are representing clans or families, and those can be traced back hundreds and hundreds of years. But you can also find tartans that aren't for families. You can find them for organizations, for societies, for countries, for schools, sports, everything. There's so many different, even individuals. You can even create your own tartan and submit it to the Scottish Tartan Authority, and you can have your own tartan. So I have an example here. So how they start off with a kilt, how the kilt is made. First, they have to decide, is this going to be, what is the tartan going to look like? What is the set going to look like? This is the Davidson or Davison clan set, which is my mom's side. Yes, I'm playing favorites, and I chose my family tartans for these. So this is my mom's tartan, for example. Now this is what it looks like after you put 9 of these together. Then you have them here. Oh, there's only 6 in the picture. And then after you put it onto a kilt, this is a sports kilt, so it has the Velcro attachment here. But this shows you an example of what it looks like zoomed out. Of course, you can't really see the red in it anymore, but you would be able to in person. Okay. This is so my father's side are the MACKINNONs, and if you look on the Kilt Honor patch, you'll be wearing your little MACKINNON, your own MACKINNON tartan. So then the next thing you decide, after they decide, okay, let's say we're going to use the MACKINNON tartan. Well, which tartan? There are modern tartans, there are ancient tartans, there are hunting tartans, and everyday tartans. So this is, for example, the modern tartan. This is the hunting tartan. So you can see that this one has more woodsy tones. Well, when you would make a kilt, you would take that into consideration, what it was going to be used for. And they take these things, they use colors, for example, from the crest, the family crest, and they would gather it up. And remember, we talked about gathering it up and putting it in, attaching it or holding it together with a brooch. And this is an example of what a brooch would look like. Okay. Here are some other examples of tartan patterns. So some of these you need to know for the Kilt Honor. This is or be able to recognize. This is the Scottish National, the Heritage of Scotland. This is the Royal Stuart. So this is the one that the Queen's family would use, for example. This is the Irish tartan, the Welsh tartan. Oh, look, it's Pastor Dan's tartan. Woo woo. And then we have Pastor NJ. I don't know if he's here, but since he's the one that had this, asked me to create this honor, here we go. Shout out to him for Zimbabwe. And just to give you an example, like I said, your continent probably has its own tartan. So if your specific country doesn't, then continents also do. And then you can even have provinces or counties or states. So there's a Texas tartan. And then you can also have cities, villages, etc., organizations. I just chose a few that you needed to know and a few for fun, but you can look all of these up on your own at the Scottish Tartan Authority or the Tartan Registry. Okay. There are about 35,000 to 3,500 to 7,000 registered tartan designs. Now that's a really big discrepancy in numbers, isn't it? Is it closer to 3,000 or is it closer to 7,000? That's because it depends what you consider a different tartan design. So for example, some people might say, oh, all you did was add 2 more colors. So that's not really unique. It's not very different. So they would say closer to 3,500 tartan designs, but others would say, no, if it's a different color added in, then it's a different design. And so therefore you could lean towards the 7,000. But you can look up your own at the Scottish Register of Tartans, okay? And like I said, you can even design your own. Now remember, they do have to go horizontal and vertical with the colors, and the twill is going diagonally. If you can see that, the fabric is going diagonally. Okay. So how are they made? So there are 3 different cloth weights. There's lightweight, which is for the summer. There's medium weight, which is about 12 or 13 ounces. And then there's heavyweight, which is for the winter, and that's 15 to 16. Now I say that you could use the seasons for the different cloths, but that's not entirely true. For example, I would always 100% of the time get a heavy kilt. Why? Because they swing nicer. The heavy kilts look better when they're on. It's a nice thick material. And what they do is after you choose your weight, after you have your tartan picked out, they have they get 8 yards of tartan, and they start folding it, pleating it, and measuring it out so that the pleats are absolutely perfect and they're hand stitched together. Okay, now the average cost of an actual hand stitched 5-yard kilt is £250. Anything above 5 yards, which an 8 yard looks nicer, I will say. So that's going to be about 300 and up. But if you say, you know what, I'm not a kilt fanatic, I'm not going to use this that often, I just want a kilt I can wear once in a while to have fun, you can find a kilt for 30 to 50 pounds. Okay. So this is the traditional Prince Charlie outfit that's worn with this ensemble. There are different types of ways to wear a kilt, different outfits for kilts. This is the Prince Charlie one. This is one that you would see at a wedding, at a special event, at a dance, perhaps, at a program, etc. And so just to mention a few things, besides the waistcoat, shirt, bow tie, etc. So you don't wear a belt with the Prince Charlie outfit, and you do almost always wear, regardless of the outfit, you wear a sporn. Okay, a sporn is like a little pocket, like you can open it, you can put your money inside, you could put special items inside, etc. Then to hold your kilts together so you don't accidentally reveal more than you'd like to, you put a kilt pin here on the bottom corner. The flashes are just designer items to match your tartan pattern. You can put flashes, or you can even get your own design or own a solid color if you like. These are special kilt hose is what they're called. They're just really tall, thick, special socks. This is skeen do, and it is a small weapon, small knife. They sell fake ones as well, and these are your ghillie brogues. Other kilt outfits, for example, this would be with a Jacobite shirt and a vest. You don't have to wear a vest, a belt and a buckle, and then the ghillies. And then this is a piper's ensemble, so it's quite fancy. Then, of course, anyone, like I said, can wear a kilt. You don't have to have all of this special get-up. Here we have someone that's wearing a suit jacket and a tie. This person's wearing a t-shirt and they have what's called a utility kilt. This person's wearing a long kilt with a leather jacket, a jumper or sweater with a camo kilt. Oh, that little cute boy. That's my husband and my son, by the way. Anyway, so as you can see, you can wear all kinds of different kilts, different designs, and there's not something specific you have to wear with your kilt. When are kilts worn today? If you come to Scotland, are you going to see everyone walking around in a kilt? The answer is no. Most of the time, kilts are now used for holidays, weddings, birthdays, different military wear kilts, Scottish country dancing, Highland dancing, the Highland Games, I have pictures of those. I said weddings already. And you won't just see this in Scotland, so you'll see this all around the world. But also you'll see it in Ireland and Wales and England and America. You see a lot in all the different European countries. They have these special events. South Africa even has some special Scottish events like this that I've heard of. There's so many places that offer events, but you will see people wearing kilts mainly on events such as these. Now, you can also wear them every day, just like I showed you here. These are examples of people that wear kilts on a regular basis as part of their daily attire. And then, of course, kilts are not just for men anymore. So ladies can also wear kilts, and they come in different styles, different ways, but you can have tartan dresses, you can have skirts, tartan skirts, you can have kilts, which means it's pleated in the back with flaps in the front. You can have tartan sewn into dresses and things like that. Okay, so our spiritual thoughts is everything about the kilt was for purpose. It was a covering, a special protection, and it was also something that had a sense of belonging, a sense of unity, a sense of identity. And it really gets us thinking to God, how God protects us with his grace. He covers us with his grace, and he offers us his faithful protection. He says, let me clothe you. Let me be your garment. Let me be your tartan plaid. And I will give you the protection you need. I can protect you just like the kilt from harmful weather. And just like it kept them warm, it served as a bed, it helped them in every situation. God is even more adaptable for all of our circumstances. He can meet us where we're at, how we're at, when we're having an issue. And that's what's special about kilts, but even more special about God. So I have some Bible verses to think about that speak on this. There were so many, it was hard to choose which ones to include. And I think many of them you might have heard before. But Psalm 91, 1-4, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. So a shelter and us abiding in his shadow. I will say to the Lord, my refuge, my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. For he will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and buckler. All of those verses talk about God covering us, protecting us, keeping us safe. Ezekiel 16:8 says, when I passed by you again and saw you, I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness. Nakedness represented our sinfulness, our filthiness. I made my vow to you and entered into a covenant with you, declares the Lord God, and you became mine. So just like the kilts and the tartans, that they represented identity and someone enveloping you into their family. God does the same thing. He says, I took you and you were uncovered, and I covered you and I protected you. I've made a promise with you, and you are mine. Psalm 3, verses 3-5. But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. I call out to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. So just like we talked about earlier, how the kilt was used as a covering during the night, it was like a sleeping bag. It was used as a tent. It was multi-purpose, but it protected them through the night. That's the same way God, he's a shield around us. It says, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. So he's the reason that we get to wake up again and again, because he's protecting us. And the last one to share, there, like I said, there were many, is Habakkuk 2:14. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. So the knowledge of God's glory will be so vast, it will be as if it's covering the sea. Just like the waters cover the entire ocean, the same way the knowledge of the glory of God will cover the earth. The end. Do you guys have any questions?
Yes,
I have my sources listed here.
Thank you so much. There was one question which came from Facebook. Somebody says, can we create a Pathfinder tartan? And they actually was saying, well, is it possible that we can create it? What is your thinking on that?
So I think that person is personally a genius. That is something that we definitely want to do. I believe that Pastor NJ and Pastor Gabriel are already in the works of doing that, because wouldn't that be a beautiful addition to Pathfinders and Adventures? I will say that there are a lot of different tartans. For example, so they have Christian tartans and different religious tartans as well. So I encourage you to find one that you can claim as your own. Oh, one of the myths that I forgot to mention, some people say, "Oh, you can't wear that tartan. That's not your family's tartan." That's actually just it's kind of bad form, so to speak. But it's not something that's a law. It's not illegal.
Yes.
It's just not recommended because there's so many tartans to choose from. If you don't have a Scottish last name or Scottish descendants, then ancestors, I mean, you can still find a tartan for that applies to you personally.